Hey everybody, it's Jason with Triad InfoSec. Welcome to another one of our webinar series. Today we're here with our partner IronEdge to talk all things MSP, MSSP, and compliance. So take us away, Josh.
Well, welcome back. I just wanted to let y'all know this is a pre-recorded webinar, so put your questions in the feed, and what we will do is get all of those questions answered to you in email format. But definitely interact with us. We're going to follow up with every single thing that you asked today. If you've watched one of these before, I'm Josh. I'm the COO over at Triad InfoSec. I'm not the guy that touches your keyboard. I'm not the smart person. I just ask all the questions that you may have in your head from these experts here. Um, we're here with Rebecca Grieser, Jason Rory, and Josh Price. So I'm going to kind of go around the room and let you guys introduce yourself. Let's go ladies first. Rebecca, tell us who you are, what you do, how you got here.
All right. Well, I'm Rebecca Greiser with IronEdge Group, and I have been in the MSP space for about 7 years now. And I've been working with IronEdge for about four of those on and off. I took a sabbatical for about a year and then came back. But I help businesses with anything cyber related, anything IT related, really focusing on the strategy and support that organizations need to get their businesses where they need to be.
Awesome. Josh Price, you're our guest today. Why don't you go next, sir?
Yeah, I'm Josh Price. So my official title is with IronEdge is regional vCIO. I handle my own book of business as far as like being a vCIO for my clients, but I also oversee our Texas region, and I have a few guys under myself that they're more kind of junior vCIOs and CS client success managers, CSMs. And I've been in the MSP space for oh gosh, probably 11, almost 12 years now. With a little like kind of a wreck. I took about a 4 year break in the middle of that and tried another career and came back to IT. But yeah, so I'm based out of the Austin area and I've been with IronEdge for almost a year now.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, we're glad to have you. All right, Jason, you want to tell people about
Yeah.
everything MSP and where you came from and how you got
Yeah,
here?
absolutely. So Jason Rory, founder, CEO of Triad InfoSec. So I've been in the MSP channel for almost 20 years. The first 16 of those was spent running my own MSP, which I exited 2 years ago this week, actually. So I've walked a mile in those shoes. I worked alongside of many MSSPs. So now, we focus on compliance, all things risk management, strategic advisory. So we solely focus on that with Triad. So happy to be here. Happy to have IronEdge with us, and then looking forward to a great conversation about all things security.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you all for being here. So let's start with the easy acronym here, MSP. I know that that stands for Managed Service Provider. Can you guys tell me kind of what's the left and right limits of an MSP? Firewall, the laptop, do you institute programs? Is the MSP talking with the business leadership? Where's the roles and responsibilities in MSP land? And I'll just throw that one out there for whoever wants to jump on it.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in there. So in terms of a managed service provider and what we really do, we it depends on, there's a lot of businesses that are out there that claim to be MSP, right? So what does that actually mean fundamentally? And so for us, and for organizations that are a little more mature, that is not only the day-to-day IT support services, but it also encompasses meeting with the business executives to really understand organizational needs as well as their goals, and then partnering technology with that to help them achieve those goals. And then I can pass it over to Josh if he wants to, kind of expand on what he does on the client side of things.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So kind of piggybacking off what Rebecca said, where myself and my team comes in is, and where we kind of separate ourselves, especially at IronEdge from kind of our competitors, is we have that strategic advisor role, right? That's where the vCIO comes in, or client success manager, the guys on my team. So basically, where we go from, our managed services, support desk, help desk, we take care of, like Josh said, your firewall, your servers, your endpoints, your desktops, your laptops, all that. Now my team comes in and I'm meeting with the president, the owner, the CFO, the COO, any decision maker, somebody with influence within that client, and I'm helping them forecast and be strategic with their environment, right? So if you've got a 4-year-old server host sitting in your server closet and it's got 1.5 years, 2 years left of life on it, I'm the guy that's going to be having the conversation with you, usually quarterly. This depends on the size of the client, how often we meet. And I'm having those conversations of saying, hey, we've got to refresh your network coming up. We've got to refresh that server. You've got aging, hardware in your building, or maybe let's have a conversation of, do you want to go fully cloud, take all of your stuff that's on premise in your server closet and get rid of that and go, Microsoft Azure cloud, something like that. So myself and my team are having those conversations all the time, more on the strategic kind of in a consulting way, right? And our goal is to move everybody forward and then keep you secure to the best that we can. But then that's we can only go so far up that road, and that's where we hand off to somebody like you guys at Triad to then go further into the security realm.
Okay, so if I'm understanding this right, the CIO, you're looking at where all the information goes from a business process standpoint, effectiveness, reliability, things like that. So, Jason, you being the fractional CISO, which is Chief Information Security Officer, how do you guys, what's the difference in lens? For a business owner that's listening right now and going, well, I have a CTO. Why do I need a CIO? Why do I need a CISO? What's the difference?
Yeah.
How do y'all play nice together when you're helping a client?
Well, if you look at it, all three roles, even though they're executive level, they're different. They're very distinct roles. So typically a CTO runs the technology side. And you usually find that on the product side. Someone running, let's say it's a SaaS company. So that person's kind of in charge of all the technology that runs, the coding, the apps, the structure. The CIO is more on the operational side, budgets, spend, SLAs, making sure everything operationally using IT is running efficiently. And then the CISO, Chief Information Security Officer, his sole job is just to oversee the security program. So we all have to work together because you got the CTO running products that need to be secure. So there's collaboration between the CTO and the CISO, and then the same with the CIO, because we're all trying to leverage budgets for IT and security. So we're all talking to the CFO. So we each have a very kind of unique but collaborative role in the C-suite.
Well, I don't understand. So, the big hairy question in the room, I guess, is why not have one person do all of those roles? For a guy like me that doesn't touch a keyboard, if you know computers, why can't you do it all? Why do we need 3 people?
I think that depends on the organizational makeup. You may not need 3 people. The organization may not be big enough to need 3 people, or even 3 fractionals for that matter. It just depends on the business model. You see a lot less CTOs than anything, and really you see a lot less CISOs than CIOs. You'll usually see CIOs. They're the ones that kind of run the show because, if we talk about MSPs, that's an IT function, right? So the CIO is perfect for that. That's the senior leader for IT is a CIO. So again, depending on the makeup of the organization, what they have going on, what their needs are, because you may even see sometimes there's a chief compliance officer that sits along the chief information security officer that sits in the room as well. So just operationally, it's all about what makes sense. Do you need all 3? Do all 3 need to be there full time? And whatever mixture you can come up with. But that's how I've seen it in my experiences.
Yeah, I would say to piggyback on that as well. It's also depends on like the CIO, right? Like my team. If you are big enough to have all 3 or a fraction of all 3, right, then you can get away with a CIO like myself just being more business oriented operationally, and I don't necessarily have to have a technical background. But if it's a smaller client or a smaller business, right, that's only maybe one person is going to try to do all those things, or 2 people fractionally. Somebody like myself or my team, I do come from a technical background. I was on the help desk. I was, building networks 15 years ago for a small company here in Austin, right? And so I have technical chops. Most of, if not all of my team does have technical background, which helps with those smaller clients that can't afford multiple. But when you get to a point where you've got a client that's big enough in size, or their compliance requirements, maybe they're doing DoD contracts and they're in the CMMC realm, they're doing it's a health clinic or something like that where they've got a bunch of HIPAA stuff, right? That's where one person can't really handle all that, right? Like or it may be out of my expertise, and so it just kind of like Jason said, it scales really, is what I would say.
And I would say, from client interactions and, working with organizations, one of the questions that we like to ask is, who's watching the watchman, right? Who's actually, trust, but verified, right? We want to know and understand, as we're working with organizations, what that oversight actually looks like and when it's appropriate to actually bring in a partner to handle those functions or tasks or security or compliance.
That makes a lot of sense. So really, we've got to start with what the goals of the organization are, and then we bring in the right players to run those teams, right? So just to kind of throw the ball back in your court, Rebecca, how are you understanding what those goals are from kind of an overall perspective? Because it seems like there's definitely some stages here to say, all right, you definitely need our help. We're going to have to dig in a little bit to figure out exactly what kind of help. What does that customer journey really look like for you guys over at IronEdge when you're just meeting them versus getting started? How do you make those recommendations? What does that timing look like for a customer?
Yeah, so one of the things that we really put an emphasis on is not just understanding their technical environment, but understanding, what their roadmap initiatives are. And so we're sitting down with executive leaders and understanding where they're currently at, what their future state needs to be, and what compliance has to be wrapped around that. So whether that is, HIPAA, DFARS, CMMC, or NIST, we're sitting with them and we're asking them a lot of probing questions initially. And then we're bringing other members of our team into the room to have those conversations. So like Josh on his end, he would be in those conversations with us. We're documenting that information, and that buyer's journey is getting them a solid plan. I like to say strategy is the foundation of solid IT support, right? That is what really helps drive the initiatives, and it also holds our feet to the fire as a provider to help them achieve what those goals are. And so we're working in tandem with our CIOs as well as with folks like you over at Triad, to understand what those needs are, and then to map that out, whether that's 12 months, whether that's 18 months, 24 months, whatever that timeline, as well as budget looks like. We take all of those pieces into consideration as we're planning and mapping that out.
Okay, perfect. So I've heard everybody mention compliance a little bit here. Let's stay with that, right? I know HIPAA, I know SOC 2, I know CMMC, and there's a lot of different pieces of compliance. What's the difference between the technical functions that an MSP provides and the compliance? Like why is that a different skill set? I'm looking at you, Jason.
I know. I thought you were looking at me. It is a different skill set in my opinion, and the reason being is, a huge part, the biggest part of compliance, no matter the framework, the regulatory need, the mandates, whatever, is the technical side, right? But the remainder of that need is organizational need, and outside of IT, there's very specific things the business, the organization, senior leadership needs to do to become compliant. There's very distinct things that HR needs to do, that legal needs to do. And then you marry all that with the technical needs. So, policies, procedures, all of this has to come together harmoniously and be able to provide traceability to truly get through a compliance initiative. So technology, huge part, technology, not the only part, right? You can't just say, oh, this is IT's responsibility and think that you'll just magically become compliant by deploying some different IT tools or more advanced, security stacks. This doesn't work that way. There's a lot more things that need to happen. So therefore, people who run the compliance typically need to be able to realize that and be able to have those cross departmental conversations and understand what the compliance need is from HR, from legal, from IT, from senior leadership, and how to ensure that the policies, the procedures, the cyber insurance, all of that is written in a way that not only addresses the organizational requirements around security, but it's also something that's achievable by the IT department, the MSP, the co-managed situation, that they're actually from behind the keyboard, able to implement these things. So, because in most compliance, especially the ones that are audited, like SOC 2, ISO, CMMC, if a policy says X, you better be doing X behind the keyboard, because if there's a disconnect, then there's a problem. So I feel like it's a different skill set, and it's not to say that IT people can't do compliance. By all means, I know they can. It's just typically a resource issue because it's such a labor lift to do compliance.
Sounds like a ton of communication.
It is a lot.
So, I'm curious on the back end, right? The customer sees, hey, we've got some certain marching orders. The MSP says we've got some marching orders to make a compliance effort happen. What does the communication between a CIO and a CISO look like on the back end in order to get a compliance effort to fruition? Like where would each of you guys start with your needs? Who leads that effort? Who supports that effort? What does that dynamic look like typically in an engagement?
Yeah, I'll jump in because I think I don't know if Jason will agree or not, but in my experience anyways, it's typically started and led by the CIO, not the CISO. CISOs, unless you're doing, if it's a one-man shop, then it's a different story. But when we're talking multiple and from both sides, it usually starts with myself as a CIO. And the way that I usually start this is when I bring on a new client or I'm assigned to a new client in my region, I typically get stakeholders in a meeting and I run through a BIA, a business impact analysis. And it's a fancy way of just saying, what's your priority and what your risks and costs are, right? So if we compile a list of all the platforms and things that you use, all the way down to physical security, everything of your building, whatever it is. And then if this goes down, how much does it cost you? How long can you be down for, risk tolerance, down tolerance? Then we develop kind of an overall, like I said, a BIA to know where we stand. And then within that BIA conversation, we're going to start understanding, you have DoD contracts. You need to be CMMC compliant. You have SOC 2 audits every year. We have all these lists of things. Then I'm going to compile that into what I call an IT roadmap for that C-suite at that client. I'm going to build out what they have, and then I'm going to go back to somebody like Jason and say, hey, we need to work in tandem here on this roadmap. Myself and my technical team have discovered these holes and gaps, and these holes and gaps are here, and we need to be here and fill them because these are our requirements. You're my requirement. You're my compliance guy. You're the one that knows all these functionalities in and out. I'm not the expert in that. What do we need to do? And then kind of go from there. And then that's where he would kind of take the reins and say, okay, follow my lead on this. And then kind of I end up at the end of the day, I end up kind of being the middleman between the two. That's kind of been my experience.
Yeah, I'll echo that. I think that's exactly how it works. Because usually the CIO is already on the inside. They're doing the road mapping, the BIAs, analyzing risk, all the IT operations, and what they find by doing those processes are the compliance needs. Just like Josh said, you stumble across, you do DoD contracts. Are you working on CMMC? No. Okay. Now we have a compliance challenge in addition to all the IT challenges. So that's where, typically the CISO or compliance people get brought in, because our specialty is then taking the necessary framework to match the compliance, interpreting those controls, making them understandable, because sometimes I'm not sure who writes the control language, but a lot of times it's very complex to understand what it's really asking for. So once you can really develop that talent to understand the control says this, but this is really what needs to happen on the IT side, to satisfy that control, get credit for it, whatever the case may be. So yes, that's when it becomes a collaborative process for someone like me to go through Josh to leverage his team to say, okay, these are the technical things that we need to ensure that we're doing. We got to document it, screenshots, have evidence that it's implemented correctly. And while you're working on that, I'll go work with HR. I'll go work with legal, so we're kind of running the initiative in parallel to keep things, moving at a right clip and making progress. So, just kind of the compliance guy becomes the general, and he's working with the different groups, to make sure that the overall mission is being accomplished.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So now I'm curious kind of about the, the account management side of the piece. If I'm a business owner and I hear, well, I've got all these IT gaps and I've got this compliance gap, it just seems like there might be some ways to synergize some of those efforts for, efficiency and costs. Is that part of your lane when you're looking at this thing, Rebecca, and trying to figure out how do we get all these efforts together to make sure that the price point is not duplicating efforts, and is still delivering tons of value over the actual price, right? Because that's always our goal in any business, is to make sure that you're getting 10x the value for what you're actually paying for, because you should never buy on price. You should buy on value. I'm just curious what your thoughts are on all these moving pieces.
Well, yeah, I absolutely agree. And that's one of the things that we really trying to take into consideration is understanding what that actual budget is, right? Understanding how can we best spend our clients' dollars. When we talk about cybersecurity, when we talk about compliance, even IT, we can throw the kitchen sink out of it, but at some point it becomes too much, right? We can throw too much at it. And so Josh and his team, what they're really focused on is how to best spend the dollars that are entrusted to us, and how to ultimately meet that end goal, whether it's compliance, whether it is just beefing up their cybersecurity posture, implementing best practices. A lot of what we do is we take a holistic approach when it comes to IT and managed services and cybersecurity. And so in the initial, steps of engaging with a client, we're holistically looking at all the pieces and trying to identify that risk up front, so that we can either deploy tools or policies that will help mitigate some of that risk, but B, have a long-term plan that we can really budget over that 12, 24-month period. And Josh may have some other color commentary to add to that of how they handle it on the account management side.
Yeah, I would say, I would just kind of parrot and echo what Rebecca said there. It's just a kind of a knowing that those risks and kind of what are the needs are up front. And then the other thing is just always being fully transparent and upfront with clients about, hey, we have all these tools in our tool belt. They're not free. This is not a cheap endeavor. So just having that candid conversation to say, hey guys, I need to know how important is risk mitigation to you, right, as a business, and is it the most important thing ever, or is it number one line item on your budget? If so, all right, here's all the tools, and this is what it costs. If it's not, and they're more budget conscious, and they want to be, or even bare minimum standards, just to hit the standards, then we have to know that up front too, right? And then that's kind of how we move forward from there, just kind of having that honest, candid conversation up front, because you don't want to have a client coming on thinking that they're paying, X amount top of their budget and they're getting a certain amount, and then you come at them later with all these extra add-ons and costs, and so it's kind of like you get your cell phone bill, you don't want, you're like, oh, it's $80 a month, and all of a sudden you get your bill, it's $140 because they've added all these extra things, or you wanted certain things you thought you were getting, and then you are told later, oh, well, that's extra, so you want to be really upfront, transparent.
That makes a lot of sense. And it seems like getting in and kind of digging into the client situation before the overall quoting process is there helps. And then, everybody knows the money triangle, right? Time, money, quality. So if you want the best super fast, it's going to be expensive. If you want the best and you're willing to go slow, then we can work on the price over time. So that makes a lot of sense. So that I heard security a couple of times, and I may be absolutely wrong here, but what I know as an MSSP is managed security service provider. And I mean, it seems like everybody here is focused on security, whether it's the IT side with an MSP or it's the compliance side. So where does that fit in? What's the difference? Jason, you're smirking. I know you
I
got
have an
something to
opinion
say.
on that. To me, and this is the way I've always felt. So, as if you, an MSP at its core is an MSP. There's even a term out there where a lot of people will present themselves as a security focused or security forward MSP, but not necessarily an MSSP. So, my definition of an MSSP are the companies, the vendors who actually provide security services to an MSP. So if you look at like Huntress and other companies out there that provide MDR, SIEM, SOC services, they're providing security services. So that makes them an MSSP. That's how I define it. So typically an MSP will partner with an MSSP to deliver the full package of security stack, IT stack, so it's comprehensive, delivers massive value to the customer. If they need to tack on compliance, they come to someone like us. So that's how I kind of see the three lanes.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that, as an MSP, it typically security is a tack on, right? We don't have internally, an entire security operations center, and very, very few MSPs actually do. And so we're partnering with other organizations to make sure that not only our systems and employees are protected to be able to protect our clients, but that we're also, leading edge, not bleeding edge, but leading edge, on the security side of things and understanding what that evolving landscape continues to look like. And so we can't do it all. So we partner with other organizations that do have that experience and expertise in that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I would add to that too. I've worked for an MSSP that was an MSP first, right? So I know that we're just throwing a bunch of acronyms. But basically, it was an MSP, but we had our own in-house SOC. We had our own in-house security compliance team that does what Triad does, right? So we were a true one-stop shop. However, that's rare. It's very few and far between to see that. I mean, we were, even as a company, we were CMMC compliant. I had never seen anything like that before. However, it's by far and above the most expensive MSP you could find, right? That's going to be just outrageously expensive. And typically is clients who have more money than they know what to do with, that's also rare, right? And the way that I look at this, I'll kind of bring this back to some of my other career. I was a police officer for a while, and I think about it this way, right? Like, you've got patrol guys and girls on the streets, or they're taking service calls, or they're stopping cars, they're being proactive, fighting crime, whatever, right? But then they stop a car and they've got some people they're doing, they're into narcotics, right? Well, they can arrest those guys right then and there and just put them in jail, book them, and then move on to the next car, next stop. Or they can call the specialized unit, which is the narcotics dope team, right? Those guys then can come in and then take it from there and just have that next level of experience and expertise and the time and resources, right? Because the patrol guy, when I was on patrol, I didn't have time to be sitting on houses and doing all these long-term things. I'm going to call, right? So it's the same thing in this world, where it's like, I'm the CIO, I'm handling your security, and I can speak to compliance per se in a way, but there just comes a point where it goes past my knowledge base and my expertise, and I just run out of time and resources. And so that's where, to me, that's the tipping point of where, like, okay, we need an MSSP, we need a Triad, right? Come in here and kind of be that extra bit. That's kind of how I view it, as that military law enforcement background mind. That's kind of the way I think about it, if that makes sense.
Okay, so let's stay on the military mindset here. When it comes to compliance, the compliance side of the arm is kind of a strategic position. We need to get everybody on board. The MSP are the actionable troops that are going to get a lot of the heavy lift done, and your MSSP is the different weapons that we can use in order to get those mission accomplished. Is that an accurate analogy?
I would even go further and say that the MSSP is like the tier 1 units, right?
Okay.
They're the special. They're the special operations units, right? Like maybe the MSP is more like the infantry guys running around doing the initial push, and then the specialized. Hey, we need to go to this specific mission and target and capture this person or this guy, or we need intel on this specific region, cell, whatever it is. That's the MSSP. That's where I would say it kind of goes tier wise, right?
That makes a lot of sense. That makes that's why an end user rarely ever talks to an MSSP, right? Because you didn't see me. I wasn't here.
Yes. Yes. All behind the scenes. Yep. Quite professional.
Yeah. All right. That makes a lot of sense. So, I mean, y'all are the experts in the room. What am I missing here? What's a big part of this relationship between all three pieces of the pie that I haven't asked about? Does anything stand out to anybody?
I mean, I think we've covered a lot. I think, it's just important for everyone to know that all three pieces in some environments are absolutely critical to have. There's some environments you could get away without one of us, which is most times us as the compliance side, because not every company out there is in a regulated industry, which is fair. I mean, there's a lot of value that we can provide from an advisory standpoint, to those clients. But at the core, the MSPs are the front line. They're the ones showing the value. They're the ones managing the client. They're the ones fixing the issues that the customer sees. The customer, the success of that customer and the success of their experience relies solely on the MSP, because like I said just now, the MSSP sitting in the background, monitoring, threat hunting, alerting. No one knows who they are because everything funnels back down to the MSP to then take care of the issue, present that to, the customer and continue that relationship. That's why they're there. And then we're just here to ride along if they need compliance. So, I think all things considered, MSP, MSSP is absolutely critical. You throw in the compliance piece, we're critical from a standpoint of interpreting those controls, being able to talk to legal and HR, as I mentioned before, and let IT continue to do IT and do it well and not have to worry about the rest of the moving parts. But those moving parts are critical when you look at the picture as a whole.
Yeah.
Makes a lot of sense. Okay, so from a value proposition standpoint, I think a lot of the folks that I've talked to, IT and compliance and cybersecurity is always viewed, at least initially, as strictly a cost center. How do we take these services and turn them from a cost center into a revenue generator or a profit increaser? How do you guys leverage the infrastructure that you're putting in place to help your clients make more money with what we're doing? How does that look?
One of the things that you have to do from my standpoint and the role that I fill for my clients is you have to be able to speak in a way that, first off, they understand. So you're not going to talk technical to most of the time to these people. You're going to have to speak business. You're going to have to speak dollars, right? And you're going to have to. So if I'm coming to client and you're paying me $20,000 a month for all my services, but you feel like, what am I paying for you? I don't ever hear from you, or I only see you in our quarterly meetings. What are you guys really doing? There's two ways to approach that. One, you have to have good data on your end, right? So like with IronEdge, we have really great reporting and data analysts on our team internally that are constantly updating and building out these insane BI reports that we can go in and get all this data and then take it to Mr. and Mrs. Client and say, hey, look, like this is what we've been doing the last quarter. This is how many threats our tools have stopped. This is how many tickets we've solved and how long it's taken us, that kind of thing. So you have to be able to have that data ready, and it's good, clean data. It's not garbage data. It has to be good data, right? So that's part one. And then part two is you have to be able to help the client understand risk, right? Like essentially, and even more so you guys, but it starts with us. The conversation starts with us as the front line person is we're insurance too, right? Like I'm selling you insurance at the same time. So whether that's bringing in examples that you've actually dealt with as a CIO yourself, or you've got good field case studies that you can show the client, but you have to help them understand, and they need to also answer the question themselves for their tolerance. But how much does it cost you if one of your employees doesn't have two-factor authentication on, their account gets compromised because they, let it in or whatever, and then now that person that got compromised has lateral access to a bunch of stuff, proprietary information, and now your stuff is ransomed or held hostage, or someone has access to all of that, threatening to release it, that costs hundreds of thousands, if not millions, sometimes to get that back. And it's not just financial, it's reputation, right? The reputation of that business is also not hurt publicly if that goes public, right? So in a lot of cases, as I'm sure you guys know, Jason especially, like when you get compromised like that breaches, there's requirements also that you have to report it as well, depending on what it is, right? So when you start speaking that way in a risk insurance kind of conversation with a CFO, a CEO, a president, then you're speaking their language. Oh, okay, I don't want to spend $25,000 a month on this risk and compliance stuff and this IT stuff. It feels like I'm not getting anything. But if I don't, I'm exponentially increasing my risk of shelling out hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars in breaches and legal fees and forensics. I'm potentially down for a while, even in some cases, maybe even out of business, and my reputation ruined, right? So that's how I approach it as a CIO. I have to talk in that manner to these guys and gals, and that's what the language they speak, right?
So it's not just the revenue that came through the door. It's talking about the revenue that would have gone out the door based on the cost that you would have had to meet had you not had the protection, had you not had a smooth operating system. There's a lot of value there to make sure to represent.
Absolutely.
So on the compliance side, I mean, Jason, you had mentioned CMMC, and Josh, I think you mentioned this too, that if you're playing in the government contracting space, that's becoming a requirement. It seems to me that compliance opens doors for different businesses. I know we've talked about SOC 2 kind of doing that. How do you present that to a client and say, look, this is an investment up front, but here's X, Y, and Z that it can do for you down the road? What does that conversation look like?
I mean, it's definitely a conversation. That conversation can happen a lot of different ways. You do have the consequences of not doing, say, a CMMC. The DoD's laid out very clear that eventually, once the final rule is in full effect and the DoD timeline is ticking, there will become a time where without the C3PAO certification, you will not be able to participate in federal contracts. So therefore, you will lose revenue. So there's, I guess, in some ways, situations, whether they're unfortunate or not, your hand is forced into doing compliance. There's some where your hand is not forced, but it makes the most sense to do it. You may get a little bit of heat from your customers. This is where we see the SOC 2 and ISO 27001 come into play, because they're not necessarily contractual requirements, but they're strongly suggested. I'll put it that way. So there's a lot of situations to where, if you're an organization out there and you want to do business with a target market that you're going after, there may be a chance that target market, when they're evaluating you as a potential vendor for them, they're going to ask you certain security questions. And one of the first questions is, do you have a SOC 2 Type 2 report, or do you have an ISO 27001 certification? If not, you may get passed up. You may not. It depends on how the business handles that supplier or vendor due diligence, the third-party risk management strategy that they have. Those companies who I feel are the smart ones out there are realizing that's happening more and more. So either they're pressured to get it, or they realize they will be if they want to get the right customers for them. So they will make the decision to engage the appropriate people and go through, say, a SOC 2 or an ISO engagement to get that certification. So when they do go and try to attract the business that they want, they know they're going to get asked, so they can get in front of that conversation and say, here, we are secure. You can, rest assured we're protecting your data, or, or we use very secure methods to access your data, whatever the course or case may be. So that kind of helps, maybe not necessarily turn into a profit center, but it positions you very well in your market, and we're starting to see, a lot of that trickle downhill. We've talked to MSPs whose client's client said, hey, if I'm going to do business with you and you're supported by an MSP, I want both you and the MSP to show me proof of security measures. So that's becoming a bigger and bigger thing. So there's a lot of movement just out there in general, no matter the industry, to proactively do these things, just to be that security forward, because it helps separate them from their competition in their market that won't put in the effort to do something like this.
That makes a lot of sense. So speaking of separating them from their market, I'm curious, Rebecca, with all the clients that you're working with and just the business scene in general, are you seeing that clients and companies in general are using their new security measures in their marketing campaigns? Like, are they telling their end users that they're protecting their data better than their competitors are? And is that having any effect? Have you heard anything like that?
I'm not seeing a lot of that. I'm not seeing a lot of that outside of technology specific spaces or organizations. Most businesses are not necessarily out there marketing how secure they are as an organization to protect their employees' data, right? And especially when you start looking at larger organizations, more on the enterprise side, it's just assumed that the organization will protect, right? And I think that's where that kind of gives us a play, especially when we're talking about organizations they're not, necessarily in that SMB space, but they're not quite up to an enterprise level organization. And so that gives us a lot of play in that space, anywhere from 250, up to 1,000 employee environments, where we're going in and we're having those type of conversations with them and starting to get them really thinking about the protection of their employees' data, because it's at the forefront. We hear about the 23andMe's out there, and all of these data breaches that are occurring, but nobody's really having that conversation. It's more about how can they protect their reputation, how can they protect themselves, but not necessarily, and their clients, but not necessarily their employees. And I think both components are critical.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So we've done this down for an Army guy, right? Sounds like whatever your core value is as a business, that's your sword. That's what you're out there telling everybody you do. That's what you do better than everybody else. The experts that we have in the room today are your shield. And so while a sword is helpful and you can make a lot of movement on a battlefield with a sword, eventually you're going to get hit with something. And if you don't have the shield when it comes to security, when it comes to being able to show your compliance documentation, to be able to understand what your strategic roadmap is with an IT environment, you're kind of just left there bleeding. And that's what's really slows down a lot of progress. That seems to be where the real value is here, is that it's not a cost center, because what you're getting is resiliency out of every single service that's provided here, so that you don't have to stop moving forward with your business.
Or even worse to that, Josh. I had a client at a previous MSP when I went out of Oregon, and it was a medical client, and they had somebody internally handling their HIPAA and their PCI and their PHI stuff, and no fault to them, but they had no training, didn't know what they were doing. And I came on as the vCIO, and they told me this, and I was like, whoa, that is not good. Like, they were just doing everything completely wrong. If they would have got audited, they would have been just screwed. And so I run into that sometimes, right? Where it's like, they don't know what they don't know. And then when you show them and they help them understand, they're like, okay. And yeah, it was not cheap, but guess what? They're compliant now, right? And they're good to go. They're locked down. So yeah, that's like one of the scariest scenarios for me anyways.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Jason, Rebecca, y'all want to weigh in on this strategic viewpoint here?
Yeah, I mean, To your point about resilience, that's ultimately the goal in my mind. Is you take compliance, you take it to the next level. We tell people every day that we talk to, going beyond the cyber check box. You don't do the minimums, do the enhanced stuff because yes, you'll become compliant, but you ultimately want to become resilient. And there's benefits there. Number one, you reduce the likelihood and impact of something happening, and insurance companies love stuff like that. So if you can prove lower risk, there's benefits there. So just in general, it can help you grow, it can help you be secure, but ultimately, it keeps you, your clients, and your reputation safe, and it keeps you in business. That's the ROI behind everything. Is staying in business.
Makes a lot of sense. So I do have kind of a wild card question for you guys. I don't know why y'all got into a room with me without thinking that that wasn't going to happen. But the landscape's always changing in any battlefield. I think it's pretty cut and dry here that we're moving away from the emphasis being locks on doors and security guards and cameras. While those things are still important, I don't think they're going anywhere. The new forefront of battle is definitely digital. And the new weapon that's out there is AI. Whether you're using that for business productivity and advancing your operational capacity, or it's being used against you, or both. I'm just kind of curious what y'all's take is on AI as it's used to improve a business, AI as it's used to improve MSSP functions, AI as it's governed in an organization, and how do y'all wrap your arms around this thing and say, we want you to be at the cutting edge and use these tools so that you can grow your business, but we want you to do it the right way. What does that look like to a business owner?
Yeah, so over here we're starting to play with and implement a lot of AI tools, that and really for the purpose of helping expedite things. We have a really cool, powerful AI-based tool that allows us to rapidly track ticket issues and do quick searches to, quickly resolve common issues that our help desk gets, right? But there's also the inherent dangers that are a part of AI. And so one of the things that, for any organization that we're working with that is, thinking of deploying AI, whether it's Copilot or it's, Chat GPT or, doing something in house that's kind of homegrown, as we're starting to see a little bit more of, it's the control and the policies that are surrounding it, right? Because it's a powerful tool, but it can be a dangerous tool. And so we work with organizations to really help them identify what that risk is and how to properly implement that technology into their tool stack for their users.
What does that look like? Maybe I'm a business guy, right? I
think it's
know
policy.
people.
I think a lot of it's policies and access control. I think a lot of it is, setting what the definition of the use of the tool actually is. People don't know what they don't know. It's just like, the acceptable use policy for computers, right? Well, it's just the acceptable use policy for AI. And just really providing that education of the inherent risks that are involved with it.
So I'm curious with Josh and Jason and kind of tackling this from a CISO versus CIO, right? What's the blocking and tackling around this policy wise when it comes to hardware versus software versus people? Right? How do you approach the situation from a policy standpoint? What would you write into that policy that says, this is where it's compartmentalized to as a tool? This is how we evaluate AI-driven tools. This is the training that the people need. What's kind of on the tip of the spear leading this governance?
I mean, I think it's still semi being figured out, right? I do agree 100% with what Rebecca said. If you're going to allow AI usage in your organization, it needs to be governed with an AI acceptable use policy, but then have the technical controls behind it to control what's being used. Have a secondary process to kind of leverage what we've done in the past with, third-party risk management, but put an AI piece to that, because we've seen it. There's AI vendors popping up, software companies left and right every day with a new promise to triple this and make this more productive and get rid of humans and do all these great things that will ultimately make a business more profitable. People like shiny things. So they're going to gravitate towards that. But how do you know how secure that AI vendor is? If it's a public model, what's the process? What are they doing behind the scenes, to protect that data? So it's a very similar process to evaluating really any cloud vendor. It's just with an AI twist. There's a new certification that AI companies can get. ISO was kind of one of the first ones to market with their 42001 standard. So I think you'll see a lot more conversations around asking AI vendors for certain certifications and stuff that they've gone through to ensure that their AI model, is built with proper ethics, no hallucinations, all these things that could go wrong by using AI. So that's one process if you allow it, but then you have to be able to control it. And there's a big technical piece to that. One story that I could tell through a conversation I had with an internal CIO with an organization fairly large. They're looking at AI, but they're doing it the right way. They're running pilot groups internally, and they're looking at Copilot. So they deploy Copilot just internal. It's in part of the Office 365 ecosystem. That's great. What they didn't realize was the controls were loose around what Copilot could do and what it had access to. So a person who shouldn't have access to, let's say, HR data was able to run a prompt in Copilot and return all the salary information because it was found in a spreadsheet that was locked down in HR, but somehow it got ingested into Copilot and anyone in the organization could see it. So there's a lot of things you have to do. And yes, you want to move quick to take advantage of the benefits of AI and get on the cutting edge and use the shiny things, but you have to do it in a safe manner. It's the slowness, the verifying, take your time, because if you get it right, it's just going to be that much better. That's my take on AI.
Yeah, yeah. I'm a huge fan of AI. I tinker with it all the time on my side stuff that I do and my personal time. I use Copilot occasionally with work stuff, but I'm bullish on it, but I'm also bearish at the same time. Like I have one foot in and one foot out because I think it's great. Current state of AI, I think it's in the business use case. I think it's great for being able to automate internal processes, parsing data, things like that. But I think when you like both Jason and Rebecca said, when you start doing that, if you don't have people within your organization that technically know how to control it, man, it could be really bad. So if I have had multiple clients come out to me, what about this? Or should we be looking into AI? What do I and they're asking me for guidance, and my guidance right now is, hey, it's still really new. I'm learning as much as I can. I'm not an AI expert, and I'm sure not an AI compliance expert because, like Jason said, that's still being built. Like it's not really even like fully in place yet. So I'm always very cautious to recommend or push a client to use AI. If they do want to use it, I'm always just going to at least default at this current time to like Copilot because it is in the Microsoft ecosystem. They are basically putting you're as far as Copilot goes itself, you're going to put that onus of responsibility and liability on Microsoft, right? Just like you would if you put your servers in their Azure environment. Now it's their responsibility, and they've got a lot more money and resources than you do as a small business to lock things down. But however, like I said, I think it's gonna continue to get better and more awesome. But I'm not pushing any clients at this point to it. But if they really want to do it or look into it, I'd say drive with the foot on the gas and on the brake currently.
Agreed.
Yep. Makes a lot of sense. Don't be quick to use a weapon you don't understand. Somebody's going to get hurt, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. Well, okay, so let me just try and do a recap. My ears are leaking information. Your MSP is going to handle all of your blocking and tackling, technically speaking. They're going to make sure that all your stuff runs, that you're up to date, that you're generally resilient with your business processes and the connectivity. The MSSPs are some of the fancy teams that they can bring to bear when it comes to security, whether that's looking through every single file and double checking all of the metadata with that on an automated deal to having 24/7 teams in the background hunting for different threats that might be in your environment. That's an MSSP. Your compliance is standards of operation. It's your procedures. A lot of these are set by different governing bodies. And the trick is that while a lot of this is technical in nature, there's a lot of human element that's measured in these processes. Because ultimately, the human aspect is the greatest vulnerability, right? The wires connect to the other wires to connect to processors and computers. Those are going to function appropriately unless a human tells it to do different with a program. And so these compliance frameworks are the balance in the organization. And all of this works together in order to achieve resiliency. That's the difference between the cost center and the profit generator here. Is you have to be, as a company, you have to be able to measure the risk that you avoided, the stops in productivity, and the gaps in communication, and possibly the revenue and information that would have gotten hijacked or did get hijacked, but was paid out by your insurance policy because you were advised appropriately. That's really where the value is in these three types of services. And they all work together depending on the needs of the business. So what I'd like to do before we just close out is if any of y'all have any closing thoughts that you'd like to leave somebody with, I want to give you an opportunity to do that. And then we'll kind of do a virtual high five and send our viewers on their merry way for the rest of their day.
Yeah. I'll jump in really quick. I just had a thought come to my head when you were talking to that. Just kind of one other final way to kind of like put this in perspective for somebody that's a business owner, a CFO, a C-suite person to understand, the difference between MSP, MSSP, compliance, and why you need them. Okay, so put it this way. You're just a regular individual W-2 employee at company X, and you go to file your taxes. You have a W-2 super basic. You made $100,000 this year. You paid this much in taxes. You enter that information. Boom, you file your tax return. You might get some back. You might not. No big deal, right? Well, you're a W-2 employee, and you have a side business, and then another side business, and you've got 2 employees at this one, 3 employees at this one. So you have a W-2, and you have all the return forms that you now have to fill out for owning the business. You have all your expenses, the complexity. Now you have all these tax regulations come in place, and so now you have to hire a CPA, right? A tax guy or gal to do your taxes for you, right? That's the MSSP. That's the compliance person. And you do that because you don't want to be audited by the IRS, and you don't want to pay thousands in fines or go to jail because you didn't pay your stuff or whatever, right? You hire an MSSP to do your compliance and your extra layer of security, so you don't get audited or you don't fail the audit that you have, and you don't get fined, you don't get shut down, things like that. So that's kind of how I would equate to be able to, just another way to help somebody in that role or that position to understand what that looks like and why you would need that. It's the same reasons, just on the technology side of the house.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Rebecca, you got any closing thoughts for us?
I would just say final thoughts is, as somebody's going through and they're evaluating who to use, right? The final thought on that is ask the tough questions. Ask your provider, what do they do for security? How are they protecting their clients' data and assets? How are they going to help you achieve, whether it's compliance or security, whatever that looks like for your organization, how are they going to actually get you there? And what that relationship would look like long term. So that would be my final, piece is just ask the tough questions of the providers that you're working with.
That's great advice. That's great advice. I think that's trying to make friends and be nice often costs us good information that was right there at our fingertips. I appreciate that. Jason, what do you have for us, brother?
Final thought, leave you with a story. This actually is a good segue from what Rebecca was saying. Choosing the right team to put in place is critical. And, even something that's more critical and having the right team is in place is listening to them, listen to their suggestions. Even if you don't see security as a profit center, see it as a revenue keeper.
Mm-hmm.
The story of this, and this is a true story as of this week, I was pulled into a conversation that CEO walked in, ransomware, no advanced security tools, so therefore no way to audit, no immutable backups. The bad actors deleted the backups. They didn't have cyber insurance.
Oh, wow.
So it was the perfect storm of lack of security. I followed up today, as a matter of fact, during lunch to see how things were going with the contacts I had. And I was told they're in the process of having we're shutting down conversation.
Oh, wow.
So as unfortunate as that story is, I think it's a powerful, lessons learned for, businesses out there. Yes, to have the right providers, have the right people on the battlefield, but listen to instruction and take them at their word that they're doing it not to sell you something, but to protect you. And I'll leave you with that.
Yeah, the somber reality of the world we live in is if you're not willing to protect yourself or have somebody else help protect you, you will get attacked. You have something valuable.
Yeah.
And it's not Chicken Little. The sky is not falling. The future is bright, but you got to protect the gold that you're putting in your pocket. And as a business, the way to do that is digitally. And if you're like me, and I know how to shoot straight, but I don't know how to type straight, you probably should call one of the three other folks on this webinar. We remind you this is pre-recorded, so please email us your questions, put them in comments on social media, type them into the webinar feed right now, and we will get back to you and answer you. I know that both of our companies, Triad and IronEdge, are all about value. There's a certain amount of free value that we're happy to give. We want you to be protected that much. Now, if you want to go pro, then call us and let's talk to either me or talk to Rebecca, and we'll figure out how to take you pro. That's what we do for a living. Thank you very much for joining us for another episode of the Triad Connection. We look forward to seeing you next month. Have a great day.
Thank you.